The Colorado River has been the lifeblood of the American Southwest since people arrived in the region. Today, 40 million Americans rely on the river for drinking water, agriculture, and more. And the energy produced by its hydroelectric dams helps power the Southwest. But this once reliable river is rapidly changing. After over 20 years of climate change-caused extreme drought, the worst in 1,200 years, the river is at scarily low levels. This has a variety of effects, which you can learn more about in my video about Lake Mead, but basically, it's bad. There's less water for everything, which threatens people's daily lives in countless ways. But there have been some new developments recently, so I'll do my best to cover them. Firstly, the crazy winter in the West has caused snowpacks across the Rocky Mountains to hit incredible highs. Some areas of the upper Colorado Basin have reached 160% of their average snowpack. Since all of this water has come down as snow, the reservoirs on the Colorado River, such as Lake Mead and Lake Powell, are still incredibly low. But when the snow melts, they will partially refill. Overall, this heavy influx of water into reservoirs in the West will undo the past few years of harsh drought, but it will not be enough to undo the 20-year trend of low precipitation and aridification. Some estimates say that we would need 5 or 6 years of snowfall like this to undo the harsh drought of the past 2 decades, and that this is incredibly unlikely as climate change worsens. There are a few other incredibly important problems with the Colorado River that aren't discussed as often. Firstly, years of drought have dried out the soil in much of the Colorado Plateau, meaning when there is a lot of snow like there is this year, the water gets soaked up before it enters the river. This means that the heavy snowpack of this year will actually give less water to the reservoirs and to the river than an equal snowpack of 30 years ago. Additionally, the laws governing who gets water from the river and how much they get are extremely outdated. The Colorado River Compact dates back to 1922 and hasn't been altered enough to fit the needs of the booming cities and the cratering water resources of today. This causes conflict between reliant states and between cities in the agricultural sector. I'm not going to get into the details of the Colorado River Compact in this video, but know that it is a strange and complex agreement detailing who gets how much water, and that even if there wasn't a water shortage, the flaws in the agreement would still cause some problems, as the southwestern US has changed a lot since 1922. Recently, a huge agreement was made in which California, Arizona, and Nevada all agreed to take less water from the river. The agreement also calls for the federal government to give $1.2 billion to irrigation districts, city, and indigenous tribes if they use less water. In total, this could lower water usage by around 13%. This deal is a breakthrough, as negotiations in recent years have stalled before creating effective agreements. But while this deal is great in the short term, it is just a temporary fix, since it's only in effect until 2026, and only 3 of the 7 states that rely on the Colorado River are part of the deal. If these states truly want to end this issue, they need to reprioritize where water from the river goes, create a new Colorado River Compact that is flexible to deal with climate change, and they need to stop contributing to climate change in the first place and prepare for its effects. The best thing states can do right now is to reprioritize where water from the Colorado River goes. As you can see in this chart, 56% of the water goes to growing crops that our food eats. 24% of the water goes to other crops, mainly crops that we eat. And 21% goes to everything else, from tap water to industrial factories. While our cities could be more efficient with their water usage, most of the big cities in the Southwest already use their water fairly well. The main problem is agriculture, and it's really 2 problems. Firstly, too many crops are incredibly water intensive. Crops like cotton and alfalfa shouldn't be grown in the desert. If farmers switch to crops that use less water, they may be able to keep farming in the region as water supplies drop. Additionally, more of what's grown in the region should be grown directly for humans. A ton of plants like hay and alfalfa, which people don't even eat, are grown to produce food for livestock. This is a huge waste of water. Local governments should incentivize growing crops for human instead of livestock consumption and find a way to communicate to the public the importance of consuming fewer animal products for water security. Up until this point, I have focused on the United States, as that is where I live and where most of the coverage on this issue is. But it's necessary to note that parts of Mexico rely on this water too. Mexico is in much the same situation that the US is. They have farms and cities, large and small, that rely on the dwindling water supply, and they have just as much of a right to the water from the Colorado as the US does. Right now, Mexico only has enough water to supply places that need it. It doesn't have enough water for an actual river. In the US, recreational activities on the Colorado River are the livelihoods of many locals and a serious part of the tourism industry in the Southwest. Mexico doesn't have this opportunity because it literally does not have the water. Mexico was a part of the water agreement in 1922 and needs this river just as much as the US does, so it must be included in any future agreements. Similarly, many indigenous tribes rely on water from the Colorado River, but are often overlooked since their water usage data is grouped in with the data from the states they reside in. These tribes have a bit of a different problem than Mexico has, as they have strong claims to the water, but do not have the infrastructure to supply it to the people who need it. There are 30 federally recognized tribes in the river's basin, and they must be included in new discussions about reallocating water. Additionally, state and federal governments must work with indigenous communities to ensure that people have the water they need. Another issue is a railroad planned right alongside the Colorado River. Now, I'm all for railroads, but this one would connect the oil fields of northeastern Utah with the oil refineries of the Gulf Coast. Not only would this increase fossil fuel production and thus worsen climate change and air pollution, but it would be a train carrying crude oil directly next to the Colorado River for 100 miles. Did we learn nothing from the East Palestine, Ohio disaster? We don't have much water left in the Colorado. The last thing we should do is put ourselves in a position to poison what remains. And while the crude oil that would be transported on the railroad is waxy, meaning that it's transported as a solid, so it might be able to be cleaned up more easily, we shouldn't count on that. Again, 40 million people rely on water from the Colorado River. We can't just hope for the best. And again, even if the water isn't contaminated, the railroad would allow for more extraction of fossil fuels, resulting in more climate change and less water in the Colorado River in the future. Another massive problem with the Colorado River right now is the mud. Now, I know this doesn't seem as urgent as people not having water to drink or grow food with, but hear me out. The Colorado River was able to carve the massive canyons found across the western US because it has always carried large amounts of silt in the water, which acted like sandpaper and gradually carved out the canyons. When dams were erected, they stopped the flow of the silt. Huge deposits of silt grow behind the dams to this day. At Glen Canyon Dam, which forms Lake Powell and is the furthest large dam upstream on the Colorado, the equivalent of 61 supersized Mississippi River barge loads of sand and mud are trapped behind the dam each day. The sand trapped behind the dam is enough to bury Manhattan to a depth of 126 feet, the height of a 12-story building. As the water level in Lake Powell drops, some of these silt deposits have been exposed, creating what has been dubbed mud glaciers. The drop in water level lets these glaciers flow towards the dam, threatening to create a host of problems. If the mud gets to the dam, it could block the water from flowing through it, meaning no water could flow downstream and no energy could be produced by the dam. The mud could also damage the structural integrity of the dam. The worst part is, we knew this would happen. It was discovered before the dam was built that sediment deposits could damage the dam. When asked about this, again, before the dam was built, the commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation said, "We will let people in the future worry about it." So yes, the mud is a problem. There are increased calls to abandon Lake Powell altogether, store the water in Lake Mead, and move the silt deposits elsewhere, but this isn't being considered by the Bureau of Reclamation. This seems like a lot of bad news, and frankly, it is. It's terrifying that we've gotten into this situation. But one incredible thing has come out of this. As the water levels have dropped in reservoirs across the Colorado River, boats, planes, and even dead bodies are being uncovered. Now, America's lost national park is being found again. Glen Canyon, which was said to be a rival in beauty to the Grand Canyon, was completely submerged in water when it was dammed to form Lake Powell. Low water levels have uncovered parts of this canyon, and what isn't being clogged by the mud glaciers is magnificent. The ecosystem is starting to recover as willows and cottonwoods are sprouting, and the twirling slot canyons and elegant amphitheaters are still there. While the area will never return to the state it was in before being submerged for 60 years, it can somewhat recover. This is another reason why there are calls to abandon Lake Powell and let the river flow on to Lake Mead. It's necessary to remember the environmental impacts of a low Colorado. I know for most people, this is much less important than making sure people have the water they need, and for good reason, but we are not the only organisms that depend on this river. We've already destroyed so much of it, so we should try to restore what we can. For example, the Colorado River Delta was once described as a place with 100 green lagoons and an oasis filled with wildlife such as fish, birds, beavers, deer, and jaguars. Now, this wonder is bone dry. What have we done? We have wrecked these beautiful places, the Delta, Glen Canyon, and countless other smaller but no less wonderful places, all to create a few decades of unsustainable development. These places can start to recover if we let them, but we have to let them. The fight over the water in the Colorado River is bigger than the infighting it has created. It's about whether we can stop making our problems worse and work with each other and with the environment to create a world that benefits all life. We can do it. So how do we start? On an individual level, you can reduce water consumption where possible and consume fewer animal products like meat and dairy. But the other main thing you can do is advocate for the changes that need to happen on a societal level. We need to push for local, state, and federal governments to reprioritize water usage and incentivize water-saving tactics. We also need governments to focus on protecting the environment and properly deal with the impact of these dams. After all, messing with the environment is what got us into this mess. But here's the main thing. Even if we make our water usage as efficient as possible, if we don't stop climate change, it won't matter. The Southwest is getting drier. Worsening climate change will only speed this up. If we keep burning fossil fuels, if we keep contributing to climate change, this will be a lost cause. We must halt climate change if we hope to see real, lasting progress with the Colorado River. Thanks for watching. I've linked all of the resources I used for this video in the description. I highly recommend looking through them, as there are some fascinating and terrifying details I had to cut out. I covered a lot in this video, so I'm sure I didn't do some stuff justice. If anything, and I mean anything I've said interests you, please do some more research. This is an important topic with so many different aspects, and the best thing we can do is to educate ourselves. Also, for those of you wondering what my connection to this issue is, since I clearly don't live in the desert Southwest, I live in San Diego, so half of my tap water comes from the Colorado River. That being said, you do not need to have a direct connection to this issue to be concerned about it, and I encourage all of you, even if you live nowhere near the Southwest, to continue following this.